Shavua Tov, everyone, as we officially begin a new week. Sorry for the delay, it's trying to get everything set up here, but we're glad that you're with us, whether here in the room or here by way of WebEx or here by way of live stream or those who join us later. Let's start by quickly talking to God, and then we'll interact with each other. Thanks, Father, for this opportunity to be together, for another Shabbat that we've had a chance to spend, for a week that's still in store for us, and for the material that we get to interact with, the questions, hopefully, that get answered as we all then hopefully better prepared to interact with those around us in a way that will attract them to you and draw us closer to you. For all this, we're grateful because of Yeshua. Okay. I think let's start with that. Since
Let's start with what?
What is the blessing?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Question is, now, first of all, in all fairness, since you're closest to us, Jessica, do you have any questions for this evening?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay. Next up is those of you who are with us and in the WebEx room. Do you have any questions that you'd like us to interact with?
No, they all seem pretty happy so far.
I do.
Okay.
Okay,
And somehow we lost Jenny. Okay.
that's all right.
No, it's not. Okay, go ahead, Betty.
I saw this week that Messianic Judaism was considered a syncretic religion of Judaism and Christianity, which to me is totally wrong.
Okay,
Where did you see
I
that?
will tell you, because
Oh, you saw it too?
I think it's the same thing I saw. You saw it in the Tampa Bay Times article that had to do with the Messianic rabbi that just got sentenced.
Yes.
Oh, yes, we know him, Rabbi S. Let's just call him Rabbi S.
Okay, and not to be confused with our beloved Rabbi Schiffman, who would
No,
also.
no.
Right.
Yeah,
Now, it's not a correct term, correct?
In all honesty, there are many people out there, whether they are religiously educated or not, who either view it that way because of their own perspectives or perceptions, or because that's what they've heard from others, and so they're reporting what they heard.
It's a faulty assumption,
Yeah.
but based on, I probably, if you're going by probably more than 50% of a congregation that identifies itself as Messianic Jewish, if we walked in it during their services, they're gonna more be Christian. And the first step that's used to change a church service into a Messianic Jewish service is they just switch their terminology. And for a lot of congregations, they think that's enough. And they really are more portraying Christianity than they ever are Judaism at all. And so I think the description, although it's distressing for those of us who don't see ourselves as that way, I think the majority of congregations that people might run into would be a combination of Judaism and Christianity.
Well, with that being said, since it's incorrect, would a entity like the union write a letter to the editor saying that reporter was wrong in his definition of Messianic Judaism? Because I see this all the time and it just gets me, frankly, it pisses me off.
Oh, sure.
And understandably so. I might add, before I respond to that part of your question, there are also some organizations that who are made up of believers in Yeshua, whether Jewish or Gentile, who are what we might consider more evangelistic in the sense of they're constantly trying to reach out to the Jewish community. These organizations often present themselves as Jewish, but if you're at all, the reason I'm sort of pausing as I go along here, because I want to say this as generally as possible without naming names, to be fair to people. But when you go deeper, it certainly begins to sound more and more like what you would hear in Christianity. Now, there's nothing wrong with Christianity, so let's be mainly, yeah.
Thanks. Some bad.
Look, there's some bad points in Judaism. There's some bad points in Christianity.
Absolutely. Any human religion is going to have some bad points.
But when you pursue it further or you get further involved, you begin to see things that come across as more recognizably Christian. And I will say this, even for those Messianic congregations that have begun, and many have begun to adopt more and more Jewish stuff as part of their liturgy or their worship, there's, as Patrice has suggested, as you participate in their services or you observe them, you will, if you're alert, find many things that you would consider Christian rather than Jewish. So that's part of this larger picture. Now, how do we respond to something like this that you see in an article? There have been times when either the union or members of people in the union or members in other Messianic organizations have tried to correct such perceptions or such statements by way of a letter to the editor. Sometimes those letters to the editor get in, sometimes they don't. More often than not, they don't, because in that particular article, for example, that was just sort of a passing reference. It wasn't a focal point.
Mm-hmm.
When it's a focal point, then a more expansive or thorough response might well be attempted.
I may be skirting the edge of your rule, but I have a habit in the sense of, if I meet a person for the first time, especially not within our synagogue, but I'm out and about doing a normal American thing, whatever it is, and for Jesus, I make it very clear.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really? And I go, yes, we do not hand out pamphlets on street corners. Jews for Jesus is a very Christian organization. They want all their Jewish converts to go to churches. They don't ever send them to Messianic synagogues. And so, although we have friends in Jews for Jesus, we are not them. And I'm not ashamed of saying I'm not them and correcting everybody who has it wrong. Because trust me, you do not want to be saddled with what Jews for Jesus is.
Often said.
Well, no, that they're the attitude about them in the Jewish community.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, same thing. It's the perception of that particular organization in the Jewish community that is not an accurate reflection of who we are, and in fact is in many ways contrasting. Now, in all fairness to them, some of the people do end up in Messianic synagogues, but that's not the main thrust, not the main thrust, nor the largest number.
And at least it used to be true. I don't think it's as true as much as it was, say, 20 years ago. But Jews for Jesus has women on the telephone calling every day to set up Jews for Jesus people in churches in a city or an area, and what they're delivering to the church is not Messianic Judaism either. So just be aware.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, if you're a church person and you're sitting in the pew and somebody comes in from Jews for Jesus and says all this stuff, and you happen to write for a local newspaper, you'll probably get it wrong too, because they will sometimes self-identify as Messianic Jews. Back in the 1970s, Jewish people who had accepted Yeshua belonged to churches. They all belonged to churches. There was nothing else to do. And they were happy to call themselves Hebrew Christians. That was the name. And so there's about 15 things wrong with naming yourself this and expecting Jewish people to be
Responsible.
responsive or interested at all.
Mhm.
So when in the mid 70s, that term began being dropped, and the young people who were just, we were full of fish and vinegar. And we said we don't want to be identified as Christians. The older Hebrew Christians, they were horrified. They were angry. They were out of control. They did not want to change their identity at all. And so even back then, just the anguish of some of these people who persisted to call themselves Hebrew Christians until they died. And now nobody wants to call themselves a Hebrew Christian because it really is not a cool identity. Totally misunderstood identity. And so that's part of the issue that we have. We as the union cannot control the branding of the term Messianic Judaism. It's used for too many strange things in our culture. Is that fair enough?
Fair enough. And in fact, some within the movement, because of the occasionally ambiguous use of the term Messianic Jew, have inclined to describe themselves as Jewish followers of Yeshua, to stress that particular identity as opposed to how some people may misunderstand Messianic Jews. Frequently, when I've been asked when people call in, although it hasn't happened in the last 2 or 3 years, and they ask the question, are you Jewish or are you Christian or are you somewhere between? Frequently the question and the assumption is, are you somewhere between? Are you half and half or something like that? And so we tried to make clear from the outset of this particular synagogue's establishment and initiation that we are not a halfway house between Judaism and Christianity. We are Jews and those who've associated themselves with us in a Jewish synagogue that follows Jewish traditions and is committed to Jewish heritage. So often, like I said, frequently we've had to tell people, no, we're not a halfway house. And I had usually when that question came up, it was when I was asked if I would perform what they would call a mixed marriage between a Jew and a Christian. And I would say, yes, I'm happy to do that, but you need to stop in at the synagogue first just to see who we are and how we approach things. Because it's the only wedding ceremony that I am fully familiar with is the Jewish one. So if you're asking me to do a ceremony, it's going to be a Jewish ceremony. It's not going to be half and half. And those of you who've been associated with the synagogue are quite well aware, having been in the services, that what we have is Jewish services. We do both Hebrew and English, but they're Jewish services. They're not. Let me back that up. Christian elements of worship are not incorporated into our services. And so we celebrate Shabbat, Friday night, Saturday. Now on Sunday, we celebrate the Jewish holidays and so forth. So, and again, the website and the material we hand out to visitors all is trying to indicate that. So that's the way we've approached it. Is there anything further on that?
Does that sort of answer your question, Betty?
Yes, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
So, if you would like to write or not write or pray or do something else, that'd be fine. But yeah, we've learned not to take personally a lot of things that we've read. Although there hasn't been a lot about Messianic Judaism in the paper.
Not recently.
Not recently.
And we have had 2 or 3 excellent articles on the synagogue where the reporter took the time to try to understand the nuances.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we're a community, a Jewish community to which a number of non-Jews or with which a number of non-Jews have associated, and with whom, yes, and Jessica's waving at me.
Jessica's waving her hand.
And who find themselves, you too, Betty, yeah, who find themselves very comfortable with what we're doing here and with the Jewish way of approach. And hey, look, so it should be, because when this movement began some 2,100 years ago, well, not quite 2,100 years ago, but getting awfully close to 2,100 years ago, it was a Jewish movement, and it remained a Jewish movement through the first number of decades. And one of the first questions that was raised is, can a Gentile become part of this community without officially converting to Judaism?
Mm-hmm.
And the decision was made, yes, Gentiles could become attach themselves to this community, as they have been able to attach themselves down through the years to the larger Jewish community. And they, as a Gentile believer in Yeshua.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, any other questions from those of you on the screen in front of us? All right. Then,
All right. So here's a question we got a while ago, and we're not unsure about whether or not we've talked about it. I don't think we
I
have.
don't think we have. We talked about it in other venues, but no, I don't think we've talked about it here.
I haven't. I talk about my classes,
Yeah.
but not here. All right, here's the question. Why does the blessing always go to the younger brother? Is that
The younger one.
the younger one?
Yeah.
So it's in the Tanakh, it seems that there's a pattern that, whereas we all know that, I mean, even into the United Kingdom in the into 2010s, it was always the older kid gets the vast majority of the inheritance, and the younger ones live off how generous the oldest one is to them. You read some Jane Austen books, you will see that a lot of her women characters are living off what their older brother or their older cousin is willing to give them. What is it? Why doesn't God just do it the normal way and give the older one the power and the money, and presumably the glory? Yeah?
Yeah.
You got an answer?
Oh, why don't you just very briefly summarize the stories that are there?
It is indeed true that the practice seems to be that God consistently, not in a perfect way, but consistently chooses to bless a younger child with the blessing that supposedly belongs to the oldest, or traditionally in that society has belonged to the oldest. And usually it's a man, usually it's a male. And usually the women inherit the leftovers, or since it's assumed they're going to marry into someone else's family, that they would inherit the husband's portion. And the most famous examples of these are, let's not talk about Cain and Abel. That it really sort of doesn't apply in that situation in the same way as it does in, Ishmael and Isaac. Who comes next? My brain's not working today.
Jacob and Esau.
Jacob and Esau, the 12 sons of Jacob, where actually the one who ends up with the biggest blessing is number four. And there's things that happen to 1 and 2 and 3, and God says, taking it away from you, giving it to number 4, who is Judah. But anyway, it seems like an obvious thing, and it seems puzzling. And John and I were discussing this phenomenon earlier, and I said, humanly speaking, I don't know why. But since I'm the third child in my family, I'm really happy he does. And since John's the oldest child in his family, he may not feel like he's happy about that. But God consistently does not do what we expect. Have you noticed that? That there's a pattern of God does not operate by normal rules in various situations. What you might have predicted would happen is not what ends up happening. And Charles Schulz, who was the writer and the drawer of Peanuts, used to quote a very famous thing. He used to say, God is there to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think that's a true statement. He doesn't let the status quo remain or the assumptions always remain. Sometimes he mixes them up. And there's, as we can see in the biblical text, there's always reasons for that. I think that idea continues in Yeshua's ministry. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
And don't miss these others. Joseph carrying on the tradition from Jacob when it comes, Jacob carrying on the tradition of Isaac when it comes time to bless Joseph's sons, his grandsons, blesses the younger Ephraim over the older Manasseh. Moses, whose story we've just been reading last several weeks ago. Please remember, Moses is the youngest of three. So God, again, chose him. And what I was just looking up, and you can check me on this, it seems like of Naomi's two daughter-in-laws, Ruth is the younger, not Orpah.
And when we say that God chooses to bless a younger member of the family, that does not mean he does not bless the others. That does not mean that. Remember, Ishmael received unbelievable blessings from God. And his mother was told about them. He's going to form a great nation. I'm going to give him this kingdom. And so there are promises and benefits that are given to all those who inherit. It's just not the divine right of kings. If I happen to be seeing various historical TV programs where they believed in the divine right of kings, and that was believed in maybe even till this day, that God has bestowed upon royalty the blessings to be able to rule his kingdom. He didn't have to earn them. God gives him the money. God gives him the power. God gives him the government. And he has the divine right to run things because God gave him the right. And as you can see from biblical stories, it's not there, that divine right of kings. And you're going to say, well, what about the Davidic line that God set up, that specific promise to David and his descendants to be able to rule on the throne of Jerusalem for the rest of time? And I would say yes, but don't forget it within the story. It's not always the oldest child that takes over the rule from dad. Sometimes it's a grandson. Sometimes it's a cousin because there's no children or grandchildren, so it has to switch laterally to a cousin. But I see this in the New Covenant. I see it in the Gospels, where Yeshua on several occasions is talking with the leaders of the nation, and he basically gives them parables to the effect of you know what? God is going to share his benefits with his whole kingdom. But just because you got to the kingdom first does not mean you have the lion's share of benefits. The worker who shows up at 4:45 in the afternoon is going to get the same salary as the worker who showed up at 7 in the morning. To human beings, this does not seem fair. It does not seem fair. And yet Yeshua is very clear. That guy, the 4:45 guy, gets just as many blessings as you people who are here at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then he says, sorry, not sorry. That would be in my margin, in my Bible. Once again, reiterating that God's determination of how things should be may not be our determination of how things should be. And we have to trust him in this situation. And those people who show up at 4:45, they're extremely grateful. Just not the oldest people that have been there forever. They expect a greater reward, and Yeshua says they're probably not going to get a greater reward. And if they're angry and jealous and mean about it, they're really not going to get a better reward. Have I misspoken?
No.
Okay.
You had mentioned David. Please remember, David's the youngest of the sons. Solomon is not his oldest son. When you trace, as you were talking, I was thinking about this, when you trace the line of Yeshua back, mother's line, father's line, one goes back to Solomon, not the oldest. Other goes back to Nathan, also not the oldest. That continues right on through. It's like Patrice mentioned a couple minutes ago, and she mentioned this in the car as well. We've got a God who is the God of the unexpected. He doesn't play by our rules. We play by his rules. And I think that's what I think Jacob realized when he switched his hands for blessing the sons of Joseph. He understood what God's rules were in those particular cases.
And Joseph tried to correct him. Joseph said, oh, no, Dad. Remember, Dad did not have very good eyesight by that time. And so he said, no, Dad, you've got your hands mixed up. And he says, I have not got my hands mixed up. I'm going to bless who I'm going to bless. And that's when he blessed the younger over the you'd think that Jacob would get it right for sure, wouldn't you? You'd think he'd be extra careful about getting it correctly.
And he did. So, yes. Anything further, or have we covered that?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
I think it's something where when you're reading in scripture and you want to understand it, to always note that if that happens, because I think it is we all have our inner 12-year-olds. And here's the inner or middle school kid. We all have our inner middle school kid. We all, if we're our age, we all went through those years. And so we can listen back and hear that person who's saying, that's not fair. That's not fair. How dare that happen? That's not fair. Everything's not fair. Well, what would the fair thing be? Well, the oldest should get it. It's not fair. According to who? Who says that? Well, your inner 12-year-old for whom nothing is fair in life. And when you try to get them to reason past that idea, they just don't even listen to they can't understand what you're talking about. It just doesn't, it goes in one ear and out the other. And I think that that person is resonant still in each of ours. That if something's going to make us mad, it's when the good guys don't win at the end of a TV show. Makes him really, really mad and takes it personally. Now, he's the oldest, so he can expect things to always be fair. Things are not always fair. But God always does the unexpected.
And that should give us hope, because regardless of the situation you're in, if you're in a position where you are considered less than others, we need to remember that God doesn't necessarily consider us less than others, regardless of the position we're coming to him from. So it should be a way of easing discouragement and promoting hope. That regardless of how small you might think you are, whether or not you've thought of yourself correctly, that's not the way in which God views things.
Nobody chooses what order they're born in a family, that's for sure.
Okay, how about good resources for educating kids Jewishly?
All right.
Since that came in a while ago.
That came in a while ago. I will say, let me introduce this by saying this. If you were to ask me 10 years ago or 5 years ago, it would be incredibly difficult for us we'd have to type out a list. But now, in the end of days, you can literally Google Jewish children's education or Jewish children's lessons or Jewish education for children or a combination of all of those things. And you will get like literally dozens of things that have already been made up. You can print them off right off the computer. They're already done. There are websites that are very helpful. My Jewish Learning is extremely helpful, and other websites that are like that, because when you click on them, they have a range of things. They have videos for kids. They have lesson plans for kids. They have worksheets for kids. And My Jewish Learning is not the only one. It's the only one that's popping into my mind. And also another place that I just saw recently when I was on like last month is Pinterest. If you belong to Pinterest and you put in there Jewish children's education, you will get ready right there, already made up because of the pandemic, yes. Lessons. And don't tell anybody. But there are some Christians who've done work in things from the Tanakh, and you might be able to use those too, because they're not going to say any of the bad terminology that you don't want the kids to acquire. And once again, you're going to see videos, animated videos, all ready for you to print out on your own paper, or all ready for you to edit the way you want to. It's hundreds of things out there to look for. If you want a specific story, let's say this Joseph in Egypt, put it in there and they'll show you Joseph in Egypt, things to do with kids, crafts to make. There are a lot of crafts in Pinterest because that was the way they started, was crafty things. But now it's gone to other situations. Here's one that we don't recommend. And unfortunately, this used to be the only one you could basically find. We do not recommend Ha'esh. Correct? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Aish, A-I-S-H.
AI.
A-I.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Oh, okay.
It didn't, isn't it? A-I-S-H. We
Yeah.
We don't recommend aish.com.
What?
We don't. Why do I say that? Because they are run by super ultra Orthodox. And there are some problems with super ultra Orthodox Judaism, at least as far as I'm concerned. Here's the problem. Number one problem, their view of women or girls. It's not. They are not equal. They are not as important. And so you're going to see a downplaying of pictures with girls in them. You're going to see, it's just unfortunate. Also, you're going to see an emphasis more on glatt kosher. Once again, if you do glatt kosher, God bless you. But that's not something that we concentrate a lot of our effort on as far as our brand of Judaism as a couple. If you live within walking distance of a kosher community or synagogue, God bless you, do what you need to do. But we don't. And so to be, I don't know how I can put this, to be the polar bear family on the iceberg floating out in the middle of a big giant ocean, but we're going to keep every single dietary law, even though we don't see anybody else. And it's a whole different thing. And so we as a family basically decided we were not going to pursue all the kosher recommendations to the end of the line. If you and your family want to make an agreement that you're going to do that, once again, God bless you. But they take it, H.com takes it as of course you'll want to do this. And so they can take you off in different rabbit trails that I don't think it's sort of worth pursuing that one. There's so many other good materials out there that are far more open-minded in a good way.
There's also a group that's connected with the Jewish Museum in San Francisco that produces educational materials. I wish I could remember their name, but I was really impressed by what we saw when we were actually out in San Francisco and saw some of these materials and then saw them later online. So that's another excellent source.
Since in the past 2 years, it's been amazing how many things have been produced, because remember, so many couples were at home teaching their own kids, and that goes double for synagogue lessons. If you wanted your kids to do something on the weekend that has, as if they were in synagogue that weekend, but they're not, then you've got, it's already there on the interwebs. I hope that's helpful.
Jenny, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Uh-oh.
So swallow what you're chewing on.
It's popcorn.
It's
Okay,
popcorn. Okay, perfect.
that's kosher.
As you've helped supervise our Shabbat school stuff, can you think of any sources that you have found particularly helpful?
I don't know if it's still called this, but it was Bim Bam. Do you remember that?
Bim Bam.
Patrice?
Yeah, Bim Bam. And they
And
produced a whole bunch of animated things.
Yep, and they have
Yeah.
really good things, and we use that with the young. That's more of a younger group, I think.
Mhm.
And then we got the Torah. Where did we get the Torah Club from? That was
Is that First Fruits of
First Fruits.
Zion? First
Torah
Fruits of
Fruits.
Zion?
Yes, that's it. Yep.
Yeah, and they tend to be very good too, and they have materials. Of course, any of these groups want you to buy materials from them. I mean, whether they're Messianic Jewish or just, ordinary Jewish, the intent is for you to buy things from them. So they'll offer you, do you want 10 of these books and do these lessons for the next 4 weeks, or those kinds of things. And that's fine too. If you want to put in money to it, you could. But there's really, I'm going to use this word because I haven't used it in about 3 months, a plethora
And we heard it last
of
night.
stuff. Yes, we did. Because people are overusing it.
In recent years, the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations and its education committee, Shabbat School Committee, has begun to put some good materials together as well. So that's another source. Okay. I'm thinking we should skip the question on Bibles for another time.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, because you've got that in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, this is more depressing.
It's okay. But then we'll loop the other stuff.
We have to
into-
do the depressing.
Well, it's current.
Yeah, current events.
Yes,
Current events. Oh, do you want me to start that?
yes.
All right, so we got this magazine, which we get every week. It's called The Week. We've been getting it now for about a year. I really enjoy, our niece recommended it to us. It's a news magazine, sort of like Time and Newsweek are news magazines, but they are not as good as they used to be. I don't know if anyone's noticed or if anyone's paying attention to news magazines. But this is a news magazine that I find extremely helpful, and I enjoy it. It's produced by the people who do The Guardian. So The Guardian itself is out of the United Kingdom. However, this particular version, the news, comes out once a week, and it's based on the American staff of The Guardian. And the reason I like what it does is, if you have a main news story, they will quote, for instance, columns from different newspapers or different magazines or different websites in the article about it, and they do it on purpose. So this is on page 16, so it's not the lead story, but it is here in big red letters: Synagogue attack, growing fear among Jews. And hopefully you are all aware of what happened last weekend with the Shabbat attenders that were kept there by a Muslim extremist from the UK. And then it has quotes a guy from the National Review, it quotes another column from the Washington Post, and it quotes Deborah Lipstadt in the New York Times. Deborah Lipstadt is, you probably might know her from being one of the foremost experts on anti-Semitism today in the United States. She was the professor who wrote a book, and then in Great Britain, a guy argued with her, and she had to sue him to prove that the Holocaust happened.
No, I think.
Oh, do I have it backwards?
I think it's
the other way
backwards.
around? Sorry.
He was mentioned in her book.
In her book.
And he sued for libel, and he took it to, rather than do it here in the United States, he took it to the United Kingdom because their processes for prosecuting, their law on libel is different.
Is different than ours. By the way, she won. But she had to prove that the Holocaust happened as part of her court case. And I've forgotten the name of her movie.
Denial?
It might be called Denial. It came out about...
QB7.
Excuse me?
QB7.
No, QB7 is a long time ago from the 70s.
Sorry.
That's the Eras.
Yeah.
That is also a very good book. And
The movie, I
also-
think, is Denial.
I
And
think
we
it's called
saw it together.
Denial. Yeah, and I think it stars Rachel Weisz, W-I-E.
No, I think.
EISZ. She is a Hungarian British actress who's been in a ton of things. She plays Deborah Lipstadt, and she's extremely pretty, unlike Deborah Lipstadt, who is not extremely pretty, but she's feisty. She's full of character. And our son went to Emory and was able to take a class from Deborah Lipstadt herself. And he took a class from her. He still admires her and thinks she's great. So that I think is good. But this article is highlighting, how Jewish people around the United States feel about the capture of the congregants by this extremist. Brought forth a ton of memories from the Jewish community here in America. And this article points that out from a whole bunch of different viewpoints. Let me just read a couple things about it. Anti-Semitism is a remarkably durable hatred. In other words, it lasts a long, long time, which has promoted 2 millennia of dehumanization, pure persecution, and slaughter, says Michael Gerson in the Washington Post. Today, it can be found among Islamists and Christians, among tenured.
Stop a second.
Okay.
Among whom?
Islamists and Christians.
Did you catch the second part of that? It's usually assumed that only the first part is true.
Among tenured radicals and white supremacist agitators, among left-wing politicians using anti-Zionism as a pretext, and among right-wing demonstrators chanting "Jews will not replace us," as they did at the Charlottesville rallies. The routine fear Jews face for practicing their religion is a scandal of the first order, and that's in quotes. And it is the moral duty of liberals and conservatives and members of every religion to confront and marginalize anti-Semitism in our own groups. So that is from a column from the Washington Post.
Oh, that was from the Washington
Yeah,
Post,
that-
but
that-
in the news.
It's in this article.
Yeah.
Those efforts are desperately needed, said Deborah Lipstadt in the New York Times. American Jews used to worry about being identified as Jewish only when we traveled abroad. But now across the U.S., synagogues are training rabbis and congregants in self-defense, hiring armed guards, and ramping up security. Jews worry if it's safe to wear yarmulkes in the street or attend services. When worshipers do go to temple, SIC, Deborah Lipstadt calls going to a synagogue going to the temple, and that shows how she's very Reform in her Judaism, because other than Reform Jews, nobody says you're going to temple, because that would be very presumptuous to say that my synagogue is the same as the temple in Jerusalem, and therefore conservative and Orthodox never call theirs the temple. However, Northeastern Jews, they like to call, I'm going to temple.
Mhm.
Okay. The one in Jerusalem, because it's not built yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they do not equate the two, and they're not saying they're going to the temple, but
It's
they
just
just
a weird
refer
thing.
to it.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to me. All right. When worshipers do go to temple, we make a mental check of the nearest entrance, of the nearest exit, and make a plan to escape. Resiliency is part of the Jewish DNA. But she says we are shaken. We are not okay. Do our non-Jewish friends and allies see what is happening? And that's part of this article that's here. So whether we were predicting the future or not, about 10 months ago, John and I decided that we wanted to do a talk to the union when we meet in a couple weeks about anti-Semitism within Messianic Judaism. That might be shocking to you guys, but here's what we have found to be true. Almost every single person that you would meet at it's going to be a leadership conference of the Union of Messianic Synagogues, and there's going to be rabbis coming there from all over the country. And just about all of us were discipled as new believers by Christians. There's very, very few of us that came the purely Jewish way, where we were Jewish, and our Jewish mentor discipled us in the ways of Judaism and Messianic Judaism. Those people really don't exist, at least not yet. So the problem is going to be if you were mentored or discipled by a Christian, a well-meaning Christian, a lovely person, you would die for that person. They're the greatest person on earth. But if they communicated to you something that's not true, and it's something that will not be give you a good attitude about the Jewish people, then you continue that problem that comes out of Christianity. And unfortunately, many churches without reason, they don't realize when they talk to pastors and the ministers, they get up and give sermons, and they don't realize what the people in the pews are hearing. Or they have explanations for problem passages in the scripture, and the people go, yeah, that seems right. Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, that seems right. But when you look at them from a Jewish point of view, they're horrific. They're terrible. And these kinds of attitudes, it's not on purpose. Trust me, it's things that are overlooked and assumed to be correct theology, and when they're not at all. And it was those things that John and I decided that we wanted to start talking to the leadership within the Messianic movement, because John has heard people have discussions, and he was horrified by their attitudes and their understanding of specific verses, and they were dead wrong. They were dead wrong. And no two people, even he and I, probably don't agree on what every single verse in the scripture means. There's maybe 5 or 6 verses we might. But oftentimes, when you're on a train of thought, especially if you're a new believer, you just absorb it all like a sponge, and you don't have the discernment to say, wait a minute, they said, what about that? And so John and I were just saying, these are the kinds of things we're hearing, and basically, they lead to harmful attitudes about Jewish people. They lead to harmful attitudes about the Jewish community. And so we were very concerned about what we were hearing and seeing, and we thought we got to rein it in by showing them what they're actually saying. You want to?
As Patrice was talking, I was reminded of a quote that I saw and that I photocopied. It comes from Rabbi Nathan Cardozo, and I'm trying to see if he's got his links here. Yeah, he's part of Cardozo Academy. Okay.
Cardozo Academy, one word, .org.
Yeah. Anyhow, this comes from 2013, almost exactly 9 years ago, because it comes from January. But this summarizes something what Patrice has already been talking about, and that is what unfortunately has become resident in much of Christianity and therefore spilled over into parts of Messianic Judaism. And I don't know how common it is among the leaders, but it's certainly common among the people who are in their congregations. But this is what history has brought us. And I quote, "It is the portrait of Jesus created by the church that has prevailed as the most common and perhaps the most authoritative one in Western civilization." Okay, the portrait created by the church is what he's talking about. "In its determination to separate Christianity from Judaism, the church went out of its way to rewrite the story of Jesus in such a way that he became a strong opponent of Judaism and above all of halakha, or what is associated with rabbinic Judaism or classical Judaism." Now, in a couple of our sessions with you from a couple months ago, and we're trying to remember what parts of this conversation we've had with you, I know, interacted over the question of the role of the Sanhedrin in the Jewish leadership in the trial of Yeshua. So we've covered that with you already, and I believe we also went through with you the reception of Yeshua by the Jewish people, not his rejection, as ably illustrated by the Palm Sunday scene. Are we correct in assuming that we did go over that with you? Virginia, Betty? Yeah, okay. All right, then. And I think we may have reflected on this. Patrice suggested we reflect on it again very briefly before we move into some of these other areas that are in this whole packet of misinformation. John chapter 1, verse 11 says, "He came unto his own, and his own did not receive him," or received him not, depending on the translation. And often the commentary on that goes something like this. Well, look, the Jewish people are his own people, so he came unto the Jewish people, and this Jewish people rejected him. Right? And that's how John 1:11 is often used, or at least referenced. And in fact, I did hear one of the leaders in the Messianic movement, as part of his conversation about something else, mention that particular text. So let me remind you of the context of John chapter 1. We talked about some of it last night because it came up in connection with the Drash and the Parsha and the Haftarah for this week. But John chapter 1 begins by saying, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then it says, "All things were created by him." Catch that? Right at the outset, we're told, all things are created by him. And then it talks about in him was life, and that life was the light of the world. And he came to bring bring light to that darkness. And this is the one who, verse 9, who gives light to everyone that comes into the world. Okay. That's the context for what happens 2 verses later, John 1:11, where it says he came to his own, and his own received him not. In the context, as I very quickly summarized it for you, has there yet been a mention of the Jewish people? What did he create? Or whom did he create?
The world.
The world. Who has he lit up? Who has he given light to?
The world.
Everyone who's come into the world. The context associates his own with the world which he has created. So when it says he came into the world, or he came unto his own and the own received him not, what is the context telling us? It means he came to his world and the world did not receive him. It's not saying anything in this particular passage about the Jewish people. And yet frequently that verse is used to say, see, the Jewish people rejected Yeshua.
Oh, I think about 90% of the time it's used that way in churches.
Which is why then we took the time out to, first of all, talk in terms of the role of the Sanhedrin. And please remember, when we're talking about the Sanhedrin, these are the religious leaders of the Jewish people who were in control in Jerusalem. Now, the Sanhedrin was made up of the high priest and his family and his allies and his associates. Okay? Usually these were, largely, these were people associated with the Sadducees. And this was the group, this leadership that was resident or headquartered in Jerusalem. This is the one before whom Yeshua had, as it's often called, the trial. And we talked about all this before. But as we described it for you, it was much more like a grand jury than it was an actual trial, because the actual trial took place before Pilate. And we talked about what went on in this cross-examination by the Sanhedrin. And again, these are the people, the leaders found in Jerusalem, who found, for lack of a better term, who then, I wish I could remember the legal terms, the indictment, indicted him, so to speak, and presented his indictment to the Roman leader, Pilate. I'm sorry I'm going at it in sort of a stop and start way, because I'm trying to think of what I should include and what I included before and what shouldn't be part of the discussion at this point. But anyhow, that's the thing. So it was the leadership that did this. It was not the Jewish people. Please remember that the Jewish people were those who lined the streets, as Matthew 21 and the other texts remind us, and in effect accepted him as their Messiah. But that we've talked about before. So that's part of the background with which we now approach this particular subject yet again. So that's the role of the Sanhedrin. Many people, as they've reflected on this, have said that the Sanhedrin wasn't even following its own rules in a trial. But remember, it wasn't a trial, it was a grand jury kind of interaction. I don't know what to call it, interaction. And so
It was a sitting grand jury.
So it did not need to follow it's not muddied the waters, but hopefully that's just reminded you of some of the stuff we talked about before. Now the question becomes, where do we want to go next?
Well,
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go.
I thought, since we brought up the John 1 stumbling stone, let's just call it that verse that's consistently misrepresented. There's another famous one that's in James.
Okay,
I think you know which one I'm talking about.
not right yet.
Messiah is the end of the law.
Oh, no, James references end, but besides the end of the law is Romans 10.
All right, Romans 10.
Yeah, and then we need.
Here's another stumbling block verse that is continually misinterpreted by well-meaning Christians. You want me to find it for you?
John 10:4?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you just quoted it, it's fine.
Okay, but no, I think
Okay.
we should give them more than.
Okay,
I'm always trying to think of you guys. So he says Romans 10:4. This is why I bring him, because he knows where all the Bible verses are. Romans 9, 10, 11 are those famous chapters right smack dab in the middle of the book of Romans that are specifically about the Jewish people and their future. Prior to Romans 9 and then after Romans 11, it goes back to being a general letter, but the topics that are in 9, 10, 11 are very specific. And so you see it's in chapter 10, verse what? Chapter 10, verse 4. All right, so this is, brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them, being the Jewish people, is for their salvation. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. In other words, they're very zealous, but they might not have all the knowledge that they need. Verse 3, for not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, this is what people do. They did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. Once again, common human activity. And verse 4, for Messiah is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. So the misinterpretation of this is, see, this verse says the law ends. The law ends with Yeshua. We don't have to pay attention to it anymore. It's too hard to keep. So we just don't even look at it anymore. It doesn't apply to us. We're free in Messiah. We don't have to obey the law. Hear how that goes. And it sounds very reasonable to your average churchgoer. Yeah, that's right. That seems right. Except that's not what it's saying. It's a poor translation. Here's what it should be. For Messiah is the goal of the law. Not the end in stop, dead, it's all over, but what you're aiming for, the end of the race. What you're aiming for. The good part, the part where everybody gets a prize, is the goal of the law, not the you're out end of the law. Very, very commonly misunderstood and preached incorrect. I hear him looking up something else.
I'm going to the James passage.
Okay.
That's related to.
We have another one that's related to this Romans 10 in James.
Hey, Trees, can I tell you what my version says?
Okay, what does your version say?
My version says Christ is the culmination of the law.
Okay, what version do you have?
Yeah, this is that one that we started using with the kids. It's an NIV.
NIV. Good for them. Good for them. And you know what? NIV is the type of translation I'm sort of not surprised. But unfortunately, a lot of these well-intentioned Christians are using King James and other old-fashioned tiny Bibles. I'm using the New American Standard, which hit the bookshelves like in the 1950s and 1960s. And so they have Messiah is the end of the law. And that's, the way it's usually presented. Okay, what you got in James?
Okay, first of all, to go from Romans, by the way, the legal term I was looking for, it was a grand jury inquiry that we were dealing with the Sanhedrin.
Grand jury is in session.
Yeah.
And what they do is an inquiry.
Yeah, it's not a trial. Okay, Messiah is the end of a law. The Greek word there is the word telos.
Telos is.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some related English terms. There is a sort of an abstract word called teleology, but many people are familiar with it. But as Patrice translated it for you, it is a term that means goal or purpose. Now, it's exactly the same term that you find in James chapter 5:11, where it says, you've heard halfway through, you've heard of Job's perseverance or patience, depending on translation. I'm going from the NIV, by the way. And you have seen, here's the translation of telos here, what the Lord finally brought about. But the older English translations read, you've seen the end of the Lord. Same term, telos. So, on the law is no more, or the Torah is no more ended or culminated, that is the Lord here. Same term.
Saying the Lord's ended now.
Yeah.
That can't be what it means, correct? My version, which is the New American Standard, you have seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings. In other words, what resulted from the Lord's dealings, not the end of the Lord's dealings.
The goal, so goal or purpose. So when you're reading that in Romans chapter 10, what it's saying is that how should I put this? The purpose of the Torah, or what is often called translated law, is to lead us to the Messiah. The goal, or we'll just leave it as that. That's its goal. So the role of the Torah here is to lead to point to Yeshua. It has nothing to do with ending or culminating.
We're doing away with.
We're doing away with. It's much like the image that you get in Galatians chapter 3, where the Torah is described as our different translations, different versions, different translations. It's described either as our tutor or our schoolmaster. And I would remind you that the purpose of a tutor or a schoolmaster is to help people mature. And that's the role of the Torah in both Romans 10 and in Galatians chapter 3. Now, Galatians 3 goes on to say, now that we've reached a level of maturity, we no longer need the tutor. Again, this is a metaphor. In other words, you need to build on what you've learned and utilize what you've been taught. Not forget it, not put it in the past, but to build on it and utilize it.
May I give a
Go.
reading of translation?
Yeah.
I was just looking up various versions and I saw this one called The Voice. I had never heard of it before, but it's an interesting translation of Romans 10:4. You see, God's purpose for the law reaches its climax when the Anointed One arrives. Now all who trust in him can have their lives made right with God.
Yeah, that gets at a good portion of it. But the main point again is the Torah is there to lead us to the Messiah and then to guide us as we walk with the Messiah. It doesn't end with the Messiah. Is that fair enough? Okay. Gosh, I didn't realize it was that late.
Yeah, time flies, whether or not you're having fun.
Now, I'm going to ask you if we, when we talked about these kinds of misunderstandings or misuses, did we talk about the Pharisees at that time? Do you remember us talking about the Pharisees?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
That could be.
Okay, so then we do need to talk about the Pharisees, but that will be the next time then when we get together.
In general, the general problem is that the Pharisees and the Sadducees are lumped together in many sermons and are made to be, and this is why you can see that the Jewish people were wrong, because they all acted like Pharisees and Sadducees. And unfortunately, the term Pharisee has come into English as meaning a hypocrite. And
But we'll get to that.
we'll get to that next week. I've joked with John saying we should do sermons that call I'm a Pharisee and you should want to be one too.
Yeah.
See, they're laughing. They think it's good. See, that part, the title's the keeper.
Okay. All right. Any questions on what we've covered tonight or related to it?
Is there anything in Revelations that that reaches the same concept? Because I run into a lot of people in this location that is into this Armageddon ideology. And
Oops, we
it's
lost you.
very convoluted because I'm going to ask for it tonight. This topic, revelations that I can address.
Okay, you're somewhat breaking up. Your audio is somewhat breaking up. Could it be, there's a famous verse in Revelation about the synagogue of Satan? Is that some of what they're drawing on? You know where that is, dear? It's in one of the first three.
Yeah, it's either chapter 2 or 3.
Mhm. So they're all hung up on Armageddon, are they?
Something, yeah, in general. And if there's anything in Armageddon that addresses the fact that Jesus is the one, and when Armageddon happens, if you don't believe in Jesus, you don't get to go. And I'm like, I'm not so sure about that.
You don't get to go to Armageddon, or you don't get to go where?
That you go through Armageddon or you get risen up. It all is determinable on Jesus.
Are you talking about the rapture?
Correct.
Or about the end times? Because there's different viewpoints on when the rapture hits, to use a verb that we normally don't use. This is in 2:9.
Okay. But I don't think that that's what she was talking about.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, again, you faded in and out, Virginia. I think, let's try that for the next time we're together, and hopefully we'll get better audio. Or if you want to jot it down and then email us at stumpthestars@gmail.com. Okay, you took some notes. Are there any?
No, I was recording the things to make sure, remember,
Okay.
that we remembered.
Got it.
We're doing this in order to help us with our presentation in front of the union leaders. We're sort of seeing what we have and what people are interested in. So thank you for helping us with all this stuff. Because it's such an overwhelming project, and we want to stick very closely to theological anti-Semitism. I mean, many people believe that the Jews are the smartest people in the world, and they believe that the Jews are the richest people in the world. But that really isn't what we want to talk about or spend our time on. We are more interested in spending our time in this presentation about theological things that are believed by many, many Christians that lead to anti-Semitic ideas. Here's my big takeaway. if you as let's say you're an average Christian, you're an average Christian. You're not a great person of God. You're just an average Christian, and you go to church pretty regularly every now and then. And let's say that somehow you are in a community where Jews start being picked on. People start picking on Jews. You're average Christian. And you think, well, gee, that's not right. Maybe I should help some of those Jewish people. Maybe I should become more involved. But then here comes the problem. If God is done with the Jewish people, if they have rejected Messiah and they are not following God's way, why should I help them? Why should I help them? They're the ones who chose the wrong way. They don't believe in Jesus. In fact, I think they even killed Jesus. So I don't see why I should help them when they're in trouble. Because this is what we saw in Europe. This is exactly what we saw in Europe. Were there helpers of Jewish people who were Christians? Yes, there were. But it's only about 10% of anybody. There was not, Corrie ten Boom was not on every street corner. She was unique. And every now and then there would be someone who would help. But the vast majority, John's parents said they wouldn't help. There were no Gentiles who would help us. They said it. There was one priest, Catholic priest, who helped them. And it's this kind of attitude that I'm very concerned about, because I don't think people are ready here in our churches. I don't. Why would I harm myself and possibly my family when they're getting what they deserve? At least that's the presentation they've always had, or their assumption from what they've always heard. Anyway, now I've brought you all down and you're all depressed, but I hope not. Just the type of thing I keep thinking about, and you sort of ponder on it for, sometimes weeks. You ponder and new things occur to us, and that's what he and I think, are trying to pull together. It's more about the theological problems than about the things that are wrong, like we're all rich and we're all smart.
Just to give you a very brief survey, Patrice mentioned 2017, the march in Charlottesville, where a number of the marchers were marching down the street saying, Jews will not replace this, Jews will not replace this. That's one form of anti-Semitism. In 2018, there was the attack on the synagogue in Pittsburgh and the killing of several people there. The person who was there, the person who was responsible for that picked on Jews and the synagogue because he did not like their stance on immigration. So that's a different form of anti-Semitism. Right? It arises out of political issues. I'm not quite
Immigrants.
sure.
Immigration.
Yeah. 2019, you had the attack on the synagogue in San Diego and the killing there. And there, he wasn't a kid, but he was quite young, who did the shooting, had written in his, I don't know if it was his diary or just in blogs, that he was going there to carry out God's judgment on the Jews because they had rejected and killed Jesus.
He was the son of an elder in that church.
In a church.
So he had really been taught this in a certain way.
That's the theological part that Patrice is talking about. And then, of course, this last one in Dallas, Fort Worth area of Texas, the reason that the guy was there was because he thought that Jews had power and influence, and so he was going to try to force these Jews to use their power and influence to free this person who is incarcerated.
In a local prison.
Yeah.
Yes, and he said to them, to the rabbi, you need to call up the chief rabbi in New York City and get them to do something about this.
Yeah.
Because he assumed that all Jews have the number to the chief rabbi of the country in New York City, and
that the
they
chief-
can do it
And that the chief rabbi there is no chief rabbi.
in the United States. There's no chief rabbi.
And that the
There's
chief,
several of them.
and that the chief rabbi could pull some strings with the national government, federal government, to enable the release of this person. That's a different form of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, he comes from the United Kingdom too, so he had wacky ideas about what America's Jews did and didn't do.
But that's a very common form. But yet another form another form of anti-Semitism. And that is, I don't know how you define that, but that has been a significant form of anti-Semitism down through the ages. It goes back at least to the turn of the 20th century. This common notion that Jewish people had power and influence. We wanted to focus on areas where people like you and people we often associate with can be helpful, and that is the theological ones, because the theological ones often provide the foundation, the framework. This kind of misunderstanding and misallocation of text provide the foundation and framework for anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic attitudes. It's like the quote that I started this section with. The church went out of its way to rewrite the story of Jesus in such a way he became a strong opponent of Judaism. And it's that part that we want to disentangle and diffuse as a platform or as an aid to, if not vehicle, for anti-Jewish actions and attitudes. So that's some of the stuff we've been dealing with you in past, and some of the stuff we've been dealing with you tonight, and that's why we're dealing with it. Because you will encounter it, if you've not already encountered it, with people that you associate with in one way, shape, or form. And who knows, there might even be some people who wander into this synagogue who haven't been disabused of those notions. Is that fair enough?
It's fair enough. Are we done now?
I think we're done.
I think we're done. We've had enough sad talk, so we should go out and enjoy the rest of the week.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Okay, thanks for coming, guys. It's always a
Thank
privilege
you.
to talk with you. And we're available by email at stumpthestars@gmail.com and
Or in person.
or in person or in our classes or, on Friday nights at our worship services. Anytime we're around and we're available for questions.
And we'll see you then.
Thank you for the time you take to do this and spend with us. And I'm glad to hear that we're helping you. That makes a really
No, this really, it does
exciting.
help us because it's one thing to think about things and discuss it between ourselves, but it's another thing totally to have to talk about it publicly
With others. Yeah.
with others. And at least you're friendly to us, so you're not going to be like throwing things. Not yet.
And we'll see you the
No,
second.
I laugh.
Hey, now that you're having this conversation, Virginia, you're coming through loud and clear.
Yeah,
You were
perfect
asking-
sound. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
That's
it's
okay.
not
So
you.
For next time,
That's right.
time is the second Saturday of February.
Okay, second Saturday of February.